Briahna, what's on your radar?
Well, Robby, Sheryl Sandberg has been doing the media rounds to promote her new documentary, Screams Back at the Silence, which she describes as giving voice to the rape victims of October 7th. The problem is the documentary draws heavily on the now discredited New York Times reporting Screams Without Words and relies on several witnesses that have subsequently been debunked by a UN report by Pramila Patten earlier this year, as well as the New York Times' own subsequent reporting. Now get this. The Lean In author and former Facebook COO was confronted about all this on PayPal billionaire David Sachs' podcast, All In Pod, on reporting from the Gray Zone and other independent media sources that have discredited claims made by the New York Times and elsewhere about sexual assault on October 7th. Let's take a listen.
That's the UN. They're not exactly a pro-Israel group.
Sheryl, let me ask, because I think it's important to note, some people will counter and say, look at this article from Gray Zone. Gray Zone said Western media concocts evidence that the UN report on October 7th sex crimes failed to deliver for March 7th. They said Western media promoted a UN report as proof Hamas sexually assaulted Israelis, yet the report's authors admitted they couldn't locate a single victim, suggested Israeli officials staged a rape scene, and denounced inaccurate forensic interpretations. I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to Gray Zone's article, because I think a lot of folks have pointed to that article and the articles that organization has put out as being representative of an alternative view that the sexual violence maybe didn't happen as evidence in your film. Maybe you can address it, give you a chance to do that.
Yeah, well, the key thing you said there is they're asking where are the victims? Well, let me tell you where the victims are. They're dead. They're dead. That is why we called this film, Screams Before Silence.
Now, contrary to Sandberg's claim, the UN report actually disproved several of the most viral claims about October 7th, including several that Sandberg includes in her documentary. The UN report said it could not verify allegations of objects found inserted in female genital organs and explained that there had been, quote, erroneous interpretations of the state of bodies by some volunteer first responders without relevant qualifications and expertise, including mischaracterizing grazing gunshot wounds to genitalia as targeted genital mutilation using knives. Moreover, Pramila Patten's UN report also noted that it did not meet with any survivor or victim of sexual violence from October 7th, despite concerted efforts encouraging them to come forward, not because they weren't alive, but because they were not made available. In her documentary, Sandberg views the alleged pictures of sexual disfigurement and reacts on camera, but chose not to show them, she says, out of respect for the families. Now let's take a look at a clip of her doing exactly that in her documentary.
This is the body with the nails and the parts. When we get closer and closer, you can see the nails.
Oh my God.
אין שתי אופציות של מה שהם עשו.
This is a piece of metal, stuck barrels.
אנחנו מצאנו אותה עם מכנסיים ותחתונים למטה.
This is not connected to the body.
זאת אישה שלקחו סכין ותקעו מלמטה, שחררו החוצה.
Oh my God.
Now, the host of All In pressed her on her choice not to show any images and asked her why the public can't see the photo evidence that she says she has seen of nails and knives driven into genitalia. Here's what she said.
They wouldn't meet YouTube standards, so that would be taken down. I mean, we can't show them right now for those two reasons. Mm-hmm. But I think over time, the world may have to see some of them. But I also want to go back to what Chamath said, because there are photos. There are clear photos and there are clear witnesses. But Rami's story, he took no photos, and he will tell you why he took no photos. He covered those bodies so no one would see.
Yeah, it's
and
traumatic.
So it's traumatic. And that's why Israel is documenting this, or not Israel, actually, I shouldn't say it. Someone in Israel is documenting this. But again, no matter what else you believe, I love the way you said it, Jason, you can absolutely believe, I absolutely believe that every single person, particularly the private citizens, not the terrorists, in Gaza should live in peace and harmony. They should, of course, get aid, but they shouldn't need aid because they should have a thriving economy and a state that's their own.
But here's what the UN investigator said about claims that objects, including knives, were inserted into women's genitals.
And two of the cases that were reported were found to be unfounded.
In fact, I just want to add, there's a third one, Chloe, where there was an allegation that there were objects like knives inserted in the genitalia of a woman. I mean, like, the team reviewed the photos, and we did not find anything like that. And I did mention, like, one of the challenges faced by, of course, by the Israeli government, but which impacted our own work, was the fact that inaccurate, unreliable forensic conclusions were drawn by untrained volunteer first responders. And we give some examples. We give some examples in the report, such as interpreting an anal dilation as anal penetration, when, according to our forensic expert, we've extensive burn damage. This is what you get, anal dilation, and the position of the body as a result of severe burn damage, again interpreted as being sexual violence.
Now, the UN report went on to say that none of the 5,000 pictures or 50 hours of video footage from October 7th shows evidence of sexual assault. Among the witnesses interviewed by Sandberg in her documentary is Sheryl Mendez, who was also a key source for the New York Times piece, Screams Without Words. Mendez told the Times that she had seen 4 female bodies brought to the Shura military base with signs of sexual violence, including, quote, a lot of blood in their pelvic areas. A Haaretz report from last month, an Israeli newspaper, however, confirmed that, quote, at Shura base, to which most of the bodies were taken for purposes of identification, there were 5 forensic pathologists at work who examined the bodies, according to a source knowledgeable about the details. There were no signs on any of those bodies attesting to sexual relations having taken place or of mutilation of genitalia. Nearly 60 tenured journalism professors at top American schools wrote to the New York Times a little over a week ago, asking that it immediately commission a group of journalism experts to conduct a thorough and full independent review of its now infamous October 7th sexual violence story, Scream Without Words, or else risk a credibility crisis as a paper. In their letter, the professors specifically raised concerns about an on-state conversation between Sheryl Sandberg and one of the authors of Screams Without Words, Jeffrey Gettleman, in which he said he did not want to even use the word evidence, to describe certain details in his own story, because evidence, he said, is almost like the legal term that suggests you're trying to prove an allegation or prove a case in court. The journalist's letter points out that the story itself uses the word evidence, and that the contradiction raises questions about the integrity of the claims within the story. Mendez is also known to have claimed to have seen a baby cut from a womb, a claim that was also discredited by the UN report. In related news, the New York Times has won the 2024 prize in international reporting, the Pulitzer Prize. Notably, however, the Screams Without Words report was not included in the New York Times' Pulitzer submission portfolio.
Yeah, look, I mean, it seems pretty clear at this case, at this point, that this story did not have enough support, corroborating evidence and accounts. The sources used, some of them have called into question the way the testimony they provided was described, and I think there are a lot of very legitimate questions with the framing at this point, and the New York Times' continued stonewalling is actually kind of telling on its own, that they don't want to admit that they rushed this story, that they trusted in somebody on the ground who had very little relevant journalist reporting experience, and looks like they got way over their skis in making claims that they couldn't, which is a huge shame because it's just important to get things right, period. And also now it's like, they still, the atrocities needed no embellishment. The victims are dead. They were killed. The circumstances of how they were killed was horrible. It doesn't add to or subtract or change any. I mean, it does, I guess, in a literal sense, if there are additional details that about sexual assault, but they're They are dead. They were attacked. They were killed.
Yeah.
And people should report on that accurately and fairly, and it's pretty clear the New York Times didn't.
I mean, I think that's part of what's so gruesome about this is that listening even to Pramila Patten explain why there wasn't evidence of sexual assault is still describing really gruesome things that happen to bodies, right? That happen to people. And it does, again, raise the question, well, why would you embellish if you have someone who has been burned and that the consequence of being burned is, anal dilation? Why do you then need to spin that into something more than what is already horrible? And I do think, I've been talking about this throughout. It raises it's an important question, because if it is barbaric to burn someone to a crisp, if it's barbaric to kill somebody, if it's barbaric to shoot somebody, then what does that mean about Israel when earlier this week, as part of the invasion of Rafah, an 18-month-old child is shot in the head? What does it mean about Israel when we have 34,000 people dead in Gaza and 3/4 of them are women and children? If we are acknowledging that the tragedy of October 7th is the tragedy of having 1,200 people murdered, and those deaths are horrible, and the people who inflicted those deaths are arguably barbaric and horrible and all of those things, well then shouldn't those words, barbaric, horrible, all of those similar words, be used to describe all of the innocent people that have been killed in Gaza? And regrettably, as we've seen from an expose from The Intercept and other sources, that the New York Times, in fact, does not allow the same language, does not recommend the same language be used to describe the tragedies that happened in Gaza versus the tragedies that happened to Israelis. And I do think that part of the constant choice to reiterate the false narratives from October 7th around sexual assault, the newest iteration being this Sheryl Sandberg documentary, do serve the purpose, whether or not they're intended to serve the purpose or they happen to serve the purpose, of trying to create some moral distance between what it means to have killed Israelis and what it means for Israel to continue killing Palestinians.
Sure, and it's important to remember that Sheryl Sandberg, in her position at Facebook, once sought the power, the right to determine what's true and false in terms of misinformation on the platform. These are the kinds of people that thought if you had a contrary idea, maybe you didn't belong as a participant on social media. Those people are perfectly capable of making errors just like everyone else.
Absolutely. Excellent point, Robby.
More Rising right after this.